People always come and they're like, I want to be a product manager. Like, why am I not getting the job? It's like, yo, calm down. Let's chunk this up a bit. And so I think a lot of people have that thought, but they just need to like pause for a sec.
Hey, my name is Felix Tia, and I'm the host of the Culture of Code podcast. In each episode, we invite engineers and product managers, anyone working in the tech industry, to learn more about their careers in the tech industry and their advice on advancing in the tech industry. In today's episode, I have Zia Mohammed, Senior Product Manager at AWS Quantum, which is a Amazon company, and also a Venture Scout at Grisham Robotics. Prior to that, he worked with other companies like IBM and Chime. Welcome to the show, Zia.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah, so tell us more about the kind of products and your role at AWS.
So I joined AWS, I think it was around May of last year on the quantum computing team. So specifically, I'm working on an AWS service called Amazon Bracket. And the whole premise of the service is quantum computers are these, think back to computers in like the 60s where they were massive machines, hard to access. So Amazon Bracket really enables customers, whether they're researchers, students, educators, academics, to gain access to these quantum computers from different vendors through the cloud. And so on the product side, I'm specifically working on developer experience, usability, SDKs, our console UI, and elements around that nature.
Got it. And you're actually our first product manager, senior product manager as well on the podcast. For listeners out there that are maybe considering this path or maybe very early on in their career, tell us more about what does it mean? What is the job of a product manager? Especially how does that job change as you kind of push in your career?
Yeah, for sure. I think product management is, to encapsulate it, the interdisciplinary point between design, business, and engineering. You'll often hear people say like, oh, PMs are like the CEO of their product, or you'll hear some like, I won't say outlandish, but a little bit more exaggerated statements. But I think the best way to look at a product manager and what you do is you have your business hat on, where you're always trying to look at metrics around who are my customers, how can I engage them, what really helps drive their customer need. And obviously business ties to revenue, churn, all these important metrics that keep a business going. There's the design element where elements like design thinking about usability. How am I going to make my product most accessible for customers? How will customers be able to use it and get what they want? And so there's the design element. And then depending on the product you're working on, there's also the technical element or the engineering side. So how am I going to build this product? Surely you're going to be working with an engineering team to actually go and say like, they'll be the ones actually building it, but you have to have that competency to be able to explain what your workflow is going to look like, what tools you might use, and be able to understand that technical content. And so product management to me is really well encapsulated by the point where all three of those meet. And you as a product manager are kind of that point where you have to work with various stakeholders, sometimes even marketing, design, business, engineering, and really work to drive version 2.0 of the product.
Yeah, that makes sense that you also need to essentially speak the language of the folks that work in design, marketing, business, and engineering. What about specifically when it comes to all this kind of cross-functional work where you have to not only understand how to speak to one individual group, but then make sure they're all working together? What specific skill sets do you need to develop to be able to do that part of the job?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest skill sets, and you will commonly hear it across PMs, is empathy. Because you're working with stakeholders who might not have technical backgrounds. You're working with stakeholders who have very technical backgrounds. And you, as being this middle point, really need to be able to empathize with not only people you're working with, those stakeholders, but also your customers, and really be the voice of the end user and the customer throughout your product development. Because you'll have people who have stronger opinions, people will bring data, and it's really your job to actually develop an empathetic point of view and be able to clearly and succinctly communicate what your customer wants to the rest of your team. And so I'd say empathy and communication are probably the biggest skills to focus in on.
Yeah, and I think when people are, let's say, going through college, there are ways for you to major in like computer science if you want to become a good engineer, or maybe you can in marketing or design if you want to become a designer or work in marketing. But it's not as widespread to have like a product management track. So what do you usually see as a typical career path for someone to get into product management? What does like their background typically look like in your experience that allows them to transition into this role?
Yes, that's one of the coolest things about product management. I think you'll meet very few kids out there who are like, I want to grow up and be a product manager. You don't necessarily hear people saying that. And the nature of the PM job itself is really, what I was saying, interdisciplinary. And so you'll have people coming from non-traditional backgrounds. Even in undergrad programs, there's very few degrees that offer product management. We've seen graduate schools start offering like PM focuses, but a lot of people either come from engineering, they come from design, some will come from business. And it's that foundation that they have that kind of initially stewards them into where they want to go. So if you come from an engineering background, you might go into a technical PM role to start off. If you come from a design background, you might go into a PM role that's more usability or UX focused. If you come from a business background, you might go into a go-to-market or sales enablement PM facing role. And so to people out there in college, there's no one thing that you can study per se. It's really about being able to say, I'm studying engineering. How can I develop some business skills? How can I build that business acumen? What projects can I do to help expand my design skills or my design capabilities? And really choosing your focus area and then making yourself well-rounded and finding those pivot points to eventually help you get to where you want to be.
Yeah, I think most listeners to the podcast are going to be coming from that engineering, computer science background. Maybe they're already engineers today and want to transition to product management. And you mentioned that you'll have to round out your skills in business and also design. What's worked for you to make sure you kind of fill those gaps or improve those aspects of your skill set?
Yeah, I think the best, if you can always get an internship, that's the best way to really start well-rounding yourself. But let's pause and be honest. It's not easy getting an internship. And any internship that you want wants like 10 years of experience. And so what you can really do in these kind of situations is look at the classes or certifications out there. I started my career, in product at IBM, and IBM had a great design thinking certification that really allowed me to understand the functions of design thinking, understand how it works, really develop some of those skills around user journeys, personas, all of these things that you'll use as a product manager. I think going back to other things or steps that I took, I remember, I was in my final year of engineering school and Harvard had been offering this like online business program. And I was like, I haven't taken any business classes. Let me go online, take some of these classes and start building up those skills so I actually understand what like basic accounting looks like or basic economics of like, how much are people willing to pay for something? It's not many engineers ask those kind of questions, which as a product manager, you want to know, like when you're writing a pricing doc or building out a pricing plan, how much are people going to pay for this? Why would anyone pay $3, $4 for a gallon of milk? I still think that's the price for milk. I could be out of touch. But the real thing that I would say is if you can't focus on getting an internship, look at the certificates or side projects that you can pick up as an engineer or as a designer that'll help fill those gaps, whether that's joining clubs, joining a startup. It'll really help you out to build your resume so that when you apply to these APM programs, associate product manager programs, you'll be able to at least come with a leg up as compared to someone who's just applying out of the box.
So you mentioned that you started your career at IBM, then you worked at Chime and now at Amazon. I think vastly different companies, different verticals, probably different work cultures. What have you learned, taken away from each of the places that you worked at in your career?
I think that's a great question too, especially where you pointed out vastly different cultures, vastly different industries. I think that's one of the beauties of being a product manager. As someone who's like wide-eyed, aspirational, wants to do it all, product management really allows you to have this pivot point where you can build up some fundamentals and work in different industries, whether it's AI, quantum computing, fintech, because what happens at the end of the day is you have to know your pivot. And what I mean by pivot is I'll use my journey as an example. In undergraduate, I studied electrical engineering and neuroscience. That was my focus. After finishing undergrad, I'd briefly done some work at this VC firm as an associate before landing this role as a PM at IBM. And I was focused on AI, artificial intelligence. Through my academic education, I had built some experience in engineering. The neuroscience helped expose me to some AI classes. And when I was at IBM, I was building up my skills as a product manager and building my skills in cloud computing. When I made the shift over to quantum, there was very little overlap with AI, but the skills in product management and the skills in cloud computing that I'd built helped me pivot over to quantum. When I was in quantum and I was like, oh, I want to go work at a startup. I've never worked at a startup. Let me try something new. It's the skills that I had built in product management that helped me make that pivot, and the engineering work or technical work that I've been doing that helped me make that. And then coming back to Amazon, I had already done some work in quantum computing, so that helped me, come to this new role. And what I'd say is it's really, no matter what company you go, it might be very different. But the thing I tell listeners or viewers is really find your pivot point when you're trying to grow your career and use that to find your next role. And the takeaways that I found from each company, IBM really taught me that I have to be passionate about the work I do. Chime really taught me the importance of work-life balance. It taught me that just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean that you have to spend days working on the same problem. It's okay to take breaks. And the thing I'm learning at Amazon, the thing that I really want to get out of Amazon is effective communication. Amazon is a company that is really driven by clear, concise communication. Doc writing is a big thing here, where if you want to push your feature or agenda, long form prose, write it down, write a one pager, write your ideas. And so these are the elements that I've kind of been seeking to get, and the ones that I've gotten. From IBM, it was passion for your work. Chime, it was the importance of work-life balance. And Amazon, it's effective communication.
Yeah, I noticed that too when it comes to the larger tech companies, communication, especially written communication, becomes more and more important. What's worked for you so far to develop this skill set?
Sure, it's something I'm still working on, but honestly, it's practice. I think templates do come in handy, especially when you're new to a company or a culture, being able to see what people have been doing. But then don't take that template for granted, right? Don't just copy paste, as many people might do with templates. Feel free to make it your own, because it's a template. If it was a replica, you're not bringing yourself to it. And so I'd say practice and looking at what people have done and then adding your own spin to it as well is the best way to get acclimated to these kind of things.
You mentioned earlier about getting basically your first jobs as APM inside these associate product management programs. Can you tell us more about what that interview is like? And when you first try to break into the industry, first try to break into this role, what do you have to expect the interviews to be like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the company that you are applying for and what your background is. So if you come from a technical background, it could go both ways. They might ask you a lot of technical questions, or they'll assume, all right, this person is a little competent in this field. Let's not focus too much on it and focus on the other aspects. But when you're applying to these APM programs, there's a great book out there called Cracking the PM Interview. And it'll walk you through the samples, the questions that people would actually see, and the questions that people would actually experience. For IBM specifically, I was fortunate enough to have an internship, so that at least helped expose me to what the product management culture was like at IBM, which helped me understand, okay, when I go to interview for this final round for a full-time role, this is what they'll be looking for. But again, going back to my earlier point, the questions they'll ask you, some will be product specific. So to really understand, how do you do product development? How do you prioritize items? What's your framework for thinking about problem solving? Some will be design focused. Again, sometimes you'll see in these early APM programs, like, how would you design an alarm clock for someone who is visually impaired? How would you calculate the value add of building a high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles? And they'll make you go through these exercises just to understand how you're thinking. As you gain more experience, the questions you'll be asked will be more situational around, hey, tell me about a time when you had to solve a difficult problem. And they'll be really looking for your previous examples and previous work experiences to answer that. And a great format to think about when you're responding to any of these questions is the STAR format. So initially describing the situation, the task that you had to do, the actions you took, and then the results. And it's just a way to help structure your thoughts. So the thing I'd say to early product managers applying to APM programs is definitely check out these resources or these books like Cracking the PM Interview. There's a bunch of free resources online that you can take advantage of. And then think back to the experiences you've had and really structure your thoughts, because it goes a long way when you hear a question and you respond in a structured process.
Makes sense. So you believe that a short-term thinking is negative and not helpful, detriment to a person's career. It sounds like a maybe hard-learned lesson that you got to go through. Tell us more about that experience, or what does it mean for having short-term thinking? How it can affect your career?
Yes, surprised you brought it up. I think the thing that I've learned is if you have a long-term plan, people will come at you and they'll be like, "Oh, what's your 5-year plan?" It's like, okay, calm down, right? Like you can think about like your plan in like 2 years, maybe a year. But what I'd really advocate for is long-term thinking. If you know where you want to go, and let's say you want to do like 10 different things. I'll use some hyperbole. Let's say you want to be an ambassador. Let's say you want to be an astronaut. Let's say you want to like run a fintech company or something like that. Going back to my earlier point about finding your pivot, I think one, it's important to figure out how you would make those transitions between them, but then also know where you want to go in the end. Because if you know where you want to go in the long term, the short-term decisions you make won't be limited to that point in time. When you're evaluating an opportunity or a decision, you'll be able to say, okay, I want to do this in 2 years, or I want to be here in 5 years or 10 years, whatever. How does this impact that? And if you're just focused on short-term things like, oh, this will help me do XYZ, or this will give me this much more money, it can negatively impact your long-term plan. And by long-term plan, I'm not saying you have to have like, it written down in some Word document or Notion or whatever. Just have an idea and start connecting the dots. Maybe make like a mind map of like, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, and then just start drawing or writing in bullet points of like where you want to be in between them. And to your earlier point, I've become a advocate of long-term thinking, because if you would have asked me like 7 years ago or 10 years ago, like, oh, do you want to be in product management? I would have been like, I have no idea what that is. But I would have known that like, hey, I want to do this in the next year or next 2 years. And so the decisions that I made in that time might have not set me up to be a product manager, but at the end of the day, they got me to where I am. So can't complain.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you said this a couple of times about recognizing when maybe you have to pivot and how to make that transition. Can you speak more to this? I think if someone has this long-term plan and it's not a straightforward path where they just join one company, one career, and work their way all the way through to this end goal, and they have to probably spend some time in one place, gather some experience, and go to another. How do you make sure that you're actually able to map that out a bit, or at least have a plan on when it's time to transition to the next thing? Like, can you say more about how you plan that out?
Yeah, I think it's, it's difficult, right? And, the catchphrase for every PM is, it depends, because everything's situational. And so what I'd really say is sometimes it's hard to predict where you want to go in the future. But if you have like an idea of where you do want to go, one exercise that I do sometimes, and, people can try it, is just get a blank piece of paper on the left-hand side or right-hand side, write down where you are now. Maybe make a dot or something, or like a square, whatever shape you want. And then on the other side of the paper, write down where you want to be. It doesn't matter if that's 10 years, 5 years, tomorrow. And then in the middle space, start writing down, in no particular order, what are the things that you have to do to get there. So let's say, I remember I was thinking about moving from from Austin to New York at one point. And I could have wrote down like Austin on one side, New York on the other side. And then I started writing like, okay, what do I need to get? Or what are the things that would make me feel comfortable to get from point A to point B? And then once you start writing something down, you'd be like, okay, I need a job in New York. Then you'll start thinking, okay, would my current job let me switch? Would I have to get a new job? I'd have to find housing. Would I live alone? Would I move with someone? And you'll start seeing as you write these things out, okay, I have this, I don't have this. And for the things you have, that's great, you have them. But for the things you don't have, start thinking about what opportunities would help you get there and how you can get those opportunities with what you currently have. And so I'd say trying this simple exercise of getting a pen, like do it physically. I'm pro digital, but like sometimes, there's something tangible about writing things down. Write it down. It doesn't have to be for moving cities. It could be for jobs. It could be 10 years down the line. If you do it over a longer period, let's say I'll use, my story a bit. Let's say on the left-hand side, I wrote engineering student. And on the right-hand side, I wrote quantum computing product manager. Going from AI engineering student to quantum computing PM seems like, how is he going to get there? But when you start writing down like, okay, I need to get into product management. I need to have a technical background. I need to be in the right location. You start chunking these daunting things and you'll start seeing things like, okay, I have an AI background. Why don't I start by being an AI product manager? That'll check one box. Next, maybe it's location. Okay, if I'm an AI product manager, maybe I can pick this location. And it doesn't have to be planned out. At the end of the day, it'll seem very structured. It'll come across as like, oh, wow, this person knows what they're doing. Nobody knows what they're doing. But, that's a quick exercise I'd recommend.
Yeah, there's that saying where you can only connect the dots looking backwards in time. But I think a lot of the exercise you're talking about, too, is about working backwards from the end goal that you want and breaking it down as much as possible until it becomes like a tangible, actionable step to take. I think one maybe fear that comes in mind when someone maps this kind of thing out is that could they ever kind of lead themselves into a trap door where, let's say in your example, engineer decides to become an AI product manager, then you just get kind of stuck there in your career. Has it ever happened along your path where you kind of have to backtrack and start from, not from scratch, but maybe a couple steps back because it feels like a dead end at a certain point, or the kind of transitions that you thought of kind of natural and just happen more easily than that?
Yeah, I think that's completely normal though. And in the moment, when you're in the thick of it, you might be like, oh my God, I'm wasting my time. What's going on? But again, hindsight 2020, you'll be able to realize that when you were miserable or when you were like sad about not being able to do one thing, you were actually focusing on other areas of personal growth, or maybe it's not career focused. It could be personal growth. It could be growing yourself. And what you'll realize is that when you go through these ups and downs, they're not linear. So you'll have, it's a zigzag, right? Instead of, I think everyone wishes they could have just a straight line going diagonal, moving up constantly. But when you talk to people, you'll realize that they've had their, scale ups, scale downs, scale back ups, flat lines. And in those periods, you'll be able to realize, okay, maybe you were not focused on that you wanted to, but during that time, you started reading more, you started painting, you started XYZ. And it really helped you grow as an individual, regardless of what you might have thought at the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of like trusting the process that happens where, like you said, in the thick of it, it always feels like the end of the world or there's a huge setback. But when you look at it, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, you'll see that it was maybe really important, maybe critical to you get to where you are at today. So now you're working at Amazon, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, working on quantum computing. So very much cutting edge emerging technologies. When you could be a product manager at a company that is solving a problem that's been not necessarily solved over and over again, but there's at least more of like a playbook for it. When you're working at a company in a field where it's again very much emerging technology, do you have to change the way that you approach product? How does the discipline change, or maybe the focus change when you are working on more emerging technologies?
Solid question. It's, I wish there were times where I could just go on Google and find the answer to the problem I'm trying to solve. But when you're working in emerging technologies like quantum or AI, literally like 5 years ago, maybe more, you can't do that. And so it allows for you to have some level of creative expression, right? Where you can just be like, let's look at how this works. I remember a quick analogy. I'll leave it a little ambiguous. There was a time a couple years ago where I was thinking about, hey, if there is like a limited quantity of something, but a lot of people want it, how can we make sure that everyone gets it? And the thing that I started thinking about was amusement parks. Think about it. You go to an amusement park and there's only one ride. Or, there's only like one Ferris wheel. It's the most boring ride. I don't know. Let's pick like, I'm from Ohio, Cedar Point. There's one like major roller coaster and like a billion people want it. But it's looking to these established industries where you can be like, oh, people come into this amusement park and then there's like fast passes, there's regular queues, there's all these different things. And so sometimes for these emerging technologies, you have to look back at non-traditional industries to see like, what are they doing? And kind of seek inspiration from when you can't just go and like Google your answer or Google your question. But to really get to the crux of your question of how emerging technology makes you different as a PM, you find yourself doing different types of user research. You'll be talking to academics, researchers, people who have spent their life focused in on this. And, it's like a hubris checker at times because you go and talk to these people and they just, every day they'll like check you. They'll be like, I did this my entire life. I've been doing this for like 50 years. And, when you're trying to build something, it really involves talking to them, doing that qualitative, not necessarily quantitative research, but the qualitative research to better understand what people want, why they started researching it, et cetera. And so the thing I always tell people when they ask about emerging technology or being a PM for emerging technologies is the answers will not be out there. You'll have to do a lot of qualitative work, talking to people, doing a lot of user research, and then seeking inspiration from non-traditional sources. Maybe it's amusement parks.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like the idea of looking outside of your industry because I think a lot of it, like you're saying, can be transferable. Maybe not directly, maybe as inspiration, but it always helps when there are other industries to look at. Can you say something, tell us more about maybe a common myth or misconception that either you had or that you see other aspiring product managers have about the career, about the job, about the role before you or before they ever step into the role and maybe the truth behind it?
Yeah, I think a common misconception that initially I shared, and I still think people, I'm hopefully trying to get over it is, and I think people think that they have to do the same thing for the rest of their lives. Like people live a long life. Let's say you go to college, you graduate at 21 or 22 or whatever the age is. Let's say you retire at the average age of like 65 or whatever. I think it's 67 now. 40 years doing the same thing? That's insane. Some people will wake up and they'll be like, oh, I've been working as an engineer for 10 years, and they'll be afraid and they'll be like, oh, I'm not going to take this risk. But people say it takes 1,000 hours to master something or 7 years to master something. You can have so many different lives that you live in that 40 years. And so a misconception or a surprise I think that people have about their career or their role is they have to do the same thing for the rest of their life. And I'm living every day trying to dispel that. Because if you live your life doing the same thing, how are you supposed to experience your life? How are you really supposed to go and try things that you always wanted to do, but you never had the opportunity to? And so I'd say that is probably the biggest misconception or myth that I think people have about their career and I guess just roles in general.
That's a great point. What about for aspiring product managers that might come to you and have questions about the career? Like what is maybe the most common question that you typically get from college students or other people that are thinking about transitioning into product management? What are some of the common questions that you get?
Yeah, people always come and they're like, I want to be a product manager. Like, why am I not getting the job? It's like, yo, calm down. Let's chunk this up a bit. And so I think a lot of people have that thought, but they just need to like pause for a sec and going back to that mind map I was telling you about of like, think where you are now and think where you want to go. And so usually when people come and ask me like, oh, how'd you get into product? I'll tell them. And then they'll be like, how do I get into product? I'll be like, okay, let's say you're an engineering student right now. If you apply to a PM job with your engineering student background, I don't think you'll get the job. Maybe you will. Good for you if you do. Hit me up on social media and be like, yo, I got the job. But I always tell them to pause and be like, hey, where's your resume now? Okay, let's look at your resume. Do you have any non-engineering skills? Because you check the tech box, but what are your design skills? Have you ever worked or designed a UX workflow? Have you ever done a user interview or built out a persona? And so I'll tell them like, these are the things you need to think about. And I'd start by having them pick up some projects or read some literature and books on how they can get these skills. Once they have some projects, once they have these skills, I'll say, all right, that's on your resume. Let's sync up again. We sync up again. It's on their resume. And then look at how can they take their existing resume and make it more PM focused. Because, PM is a non-traditional job. A lot of people will work as like a product engineer or an engineer, and they'll be talking and getting requirements from customers, but they won't know that's like something you have to do as a PM. And so making sure that the right vocabulary and the right words are being incorporated into your resume, and then viewing the application process, breaking that down too, chunking it up. So, all right, you send 100 applications. You hear back from none. Something's wrong with your resume. Maybe you didn't get a referral. Let's say you hear back. You don't make it past the recruiter round. Maybe it was, let's practice. What were you saying in the recruiting round? You make it to the final round, but you don't make it past the final round. Okay, think back. What were you doing in the final round? What did you say? What went well? What didn't work well? And really chunking it up. So, to answer your question, a lot of people come and they just think like, I want to be a PM. Take the time to pause, chill for a sec, get that piece of paper, and break it up into a process of where you are now, where you want to go, and, step by step. It won't happen tomorrow. It won't happen in a year or 6 months. Maybe it will. It just really depends on the person. Don't time box it.
Yeah, I like how that there are obviously things that you can be doing or should be doing in order to increase the odds of you getting this job, but then also that there might be things that you are already doing that you did not know that was part of the roles and responsibilities that you just didn't present it in your resume or your interviews. I think that's a good point for any kind of career, that sometimes you're already doing a lot of the things that they're looking for, but you're just not presenting it in a way that that markets yourself in the best way possible. Thank you so much for your time, Zia. As a senior product manager at Amazon, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience and advice.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And that's all the time we have this week. Come join me next time on the Culture of Code podcast. My name is Felix Tia. Take care.